Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Schools of Magic by Mark August, narrated by Gary Bennett. 1. Kincaid. Consequences. Fight or starve. Kincaid wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. The smear ran up to his sleeve, and the grime tasted like dirt and iron. His left fist clutched the ground for balance. He was no longer an apprentice carpenter. He brought his fists in front of his face and stared up at the giant in the ring. The shirtless man was twice his height. A broad chest rippled with strength as he clapped his palms together, and an empty mouth of shattered teeth grinned. He gestured for Kincaid to launch the next attack. The crowd gathered in the old warehouse erupted with a display of sportsmanship. They were getting their money's worth in this David versus Goliath competition. The fighter was a favorite of the town and defeated everyone on the coast of Caesea, and Kincaid played those odds. Fight or starve, he needed to win. Kincaid nodded his appreciation for the showmanship, which allowed him to steady his balance. The man's blows were lightning fast for his size, and he hit like a horse's hoof. Another blow like that, and Kincaid would be out. Unwilling to take more risk, Kincaid opened his heart, mind, and soul to the forces of magic. He summoned a trickle of power into his soul, and his senses exploded around him. He filtered the noises and the faces of the crowd and focused on his opponent. The giant wasn't breathing hard, and the first droplet of sweat formed on his brow. His heart thumped in anticipation, not fatigue. Kincaid wouldn't wear this man down. Where did he get this endurance? Pain disappeared with the magic pounding in his veins. The arcane power was music longing to rise from a soft beat to a crescendo. Magic pushed against his restraint and hungered for explosive release. Kincaid struggled for control with the arcane might at his command for less than a heartbeat, and the young man heard the giant's boots creak. Sportsman or not, he wasn't waiting. The courtesy of the fight was over, and the giant would finish the contest with a flourish. Spectators expected their winnings. The man was a trained fighter. As he closed into range, he balanced his weight forward on his feet, and his arms covered his face and upper chest. His entire body bobbed to the sides to get Kincaid to commit in a direction. The best the carpenter could do was stay out of reach. Tired of the retreating target, the giant surged forward. He led with a left jab with the length of a lance. Kincaid heard the muscles tense and explode outward. The small fighter pulled his body to the right and around the powerful punch. Kincaid threw his right fist and contacted the man's ribs with a thud of bone against muscle. The crowd hushed as the impact forced a grunt from the giant. Before the first punch registered, Kincaid leveraged his surprise and landed a left straight in the giant's gut. The blow cracked the tension, and the crowd exploded with cheers. Money clanked and changed hands. The favorite backed up and rubbed his chest. Kincaid's blows were impossibly strong. The fighter's eyes were wide with confusion, but Kincaid wouldn't share the secret of his powerful strikes. Fight or starve. Kincaid's visions of victory distracted him for the moment, and the giant gave no quarter in this ring. Kincaid wasn't paying attention as the blow smashed his forehead. His vision exploded with stars, and his legs turned to mush from the impact. His mind screamed to watch for the next inbound strike to his face, even as his body refused to obey the command. The surge of magic saved his life as he knocked aside the jab with his forearm. Disbelief registered on the giant's face. Recovering from the punishment, but only looking through one unswollen eye, Kincaid launched his counterblow. His right fist impacted the man's chin. Kincaid felt the stubble of the man's beard on his knuckles as the giant rocked back on his heels. The young wizard hammered blows to the body. Thud followed crack as the fists hit like a smith's hammer. Even the giant's iron body surrendered to the impacts, bending, twisting, and losing strength. The favorite never threw another punch. The magic coursing through Kincaid's being howled in delight. Warmth of the torches and oil lamps beckoned for Kincaid's senses. A blast of arcane energy could melt down any opponent standing in front of him. Start your conquest. Finish this fight. Make yourself king. The voice pounded in his skull with each beat of his heart. It had been silent since his duel with Atros, daughter of the ruling house of Caesea. Their battle led to destruction beyond their wildest imagination. City blocks burned, lives destroyed. He couldn't do that now. Not here. He thrust those thoughts aside. 2 more blows powered by his seething anger finished the bout. The giant dropped his arms on the last blow and collapsed backward like a felled tree. Dirt bounced as his body hit the ground. He wouldn't rise again tonight. Kincaid struggled with the flow of magic as he turned to the crowd. Faces leered with joy, and some growled with hatred. Silver coins passed between gamblers as the carpenter stood alone in the eerie silence of the ring. The fight organizers came forward to the inexperienced fighter, and neither had a pleasant look on their face.
Cheater!
Kincaid shook his head as he fought to get his breath back.
No way you could beat Granite at your size.
The man was from one of the northern states, with his light skin and blue eyes. He was middle-aged, soft, and in control of the fighting venture, right to where the upset changed everything. He fumed. Then why go through with the fight? Just let the opponents stand next to each other and let the fans decide. Sweat dripped as Kincaid shook his head. They demand a show.
Not your first match.
The accusation hung in the air. Kincaid allowed the smile to cross his lips. I'll take my winnings.
May let people in this crowd take your life.
Want to go around with me? Kincaid shifted his relaxed posture. He curled his hands into fists and gestured toward the fallen fighter, Granite. Back to fight or starve. The man's eyes darted toward the immobile champion and the favorite of the night. He looked toward his silent partner, who only gave a nod.
You best get out of here before I change my mind.
Kincaid stepped up to the speaker's face. Inches away from his nose, Kincaid recoiled from the tobacco and alcohol on the man's breath. Not until you give me my due. Winner's fees, now, or I start the next round right here. Kincaid would let the man throw the first shot. Just one punch, and then he'd take him. The organizer considered that exact move. But he was an actor on this stage and grabbed Kincaid's forearm. They faced the crowd, and the organizer thrust Kincaid's arm toward the ceiling. The fans roared with the victory. Applause thundered across the warehouse.
You come back here, and we'll kill you.
Give me my winnings, and I won't be back. The silent partner came forward and handed the young victor his bag of silver. There'd be more from the bookies. Kincaid had terrible odds going into the fight, and his small bet could go a long way into surviving a few more days. They wouldn't starve tonight. Shola was waiting for the bruised fighter as he staggered through the door of their room in the broken-down inn. This was what they could afford, and they were late for their last week's payment. The look on her face flashed from anger to concern as she saw the glowing purple bruises on his face. By all that is holy, Kincaid! You are fighting again? She got up from her bed and took 2 steps toward him. Her soft touch brushed aside the wild shock of his red hair and probed the swelling around his eyes. Kincaid choked back his emotions. I don't know how else we can eat and sleep, Shola. We're weeks past the fight in Caesea, and we're stuck in this harbor town. Atros can find us. Did you use magic? Kincaid turned away from her touch and looked toward the floor. By all that is good, you will lead Atros and the city council to us with your magic. We're a long way across the bay, but close enough that an agent will find us. There are only so many harbors we could have escaped to. They will not find us in the city, and the towns will be next. I can't let you starve, Shola. We're already— I know. But we can do this together, my friend. You do not have to carry this weight across your shoulders. Kincaid looked toward his few sheets and makeshift pillow on the floor of the room. They could fit both of their belongings in a small sack. They sold the few tools Shola had left from her blacksmith trade a week ago, and those funds were dangerously low. Their clothes were their few remaining possessions. We need to get to the Empire, Shola. Magic. The accusation was a whisper. This wasn't the first time they had this discussion. Yes, I don't know what else to do. Magi Cormac gave me that last instruction before I— Shola waited for the lengthy pause. You had to kill him to survive, and we are alive today. The anger once in her tone was long gone. She supported him with his emotional burden. I can't let us starve, Shola, and we can't stay here. How do we earn enough to get out of here? Work together. We know we cannot afford passage on a ship, so we must focus on land travel, a caravan. Kincaid's power could destroy city blocks, and only his imagination limited his arcane ability. But the actual source of his strength stood next to him. When his soul ached, Shola filled the emptiness. Every time he used magic, his fatigue deepened. It was a fatigue that didn't get better with rest, and Kincaid knew he sacrificed his soul with each use. He rested his willpower on the strong shoulders of his friend. "At least we won't starve tonight. Will you get food while I change?" Shola nodded once, grabbed the smallest coin from the bag of winnings, and walked downstairs to the inn to see what was left from dinner. The fight would begin again tomorrow. 2. Shola, working for a living. Using magic in the lands of Caesea was punishable by death. After they escaped from the island capital, Kincaid and Shola couldn't afford to travel farther inland and were still within the city leadership's reach. With this latest sprawl, Kincaid risked discovery by powerful forces again, and the risk grew each day. Shola lay awake, staring at the rotting timbers of their ceiling as Kincaid rolled in his thin blanket and wrestled against unseen demons, his mind and body engaged in a fight she couldn't explain. Shola didn't pretend to understand magic or its consequences to its user. Until Kincaid emerged from prison, she didn't know her friend wielded arcane power. The changes were astounding. Once a prodigy carpenter ready to make a worldwide name in his craft, he was now a hardened man forced from one tough choice to the next by events beyond his control. The fight tonight was an example of his decision-making. He slipped away, claiming he was looking for a job, and found another off-the-record match. By his reasoning, it was the right thing to do. Shola blinked away the tear because he had to lie to her. She knew he was running out of options with locations because he always won against the ring favorite. They had to find a way out of Caesean lands. Years ago, Kincaid and his sister arrived in Caesea and worked their way up from the bottom as poverty-stricken immigrants. A craftsmaster took them in and shared the secrets of his art. Everything changed with Kincaid's arcane power. Now he was a man with unimaginable potential, running from the authorities. Shola's heart broke each point he slid into terrible choices. Magic had a severe cost, and she'd seen it in her friend's eyes. Kincaid told her his very soul was at stake each moment he wielded his magic. Lessons from her time in the churches in the Empire of 1,000 Spears glorified the immortal human soul, and decisions a person made directed their soul's immortality into an afterlife. Kincaid's experience with arcane power shook the foundations of faith. Shola couldn't wait. Kincaid needed her help as much as she needed him. She wasn't a frail maiden waiting for rescue. While he tossed and turned on the floor, Shola rose to gather her things and dressed in the frosty air of the room. She slipped out the door in the pre-dawn light. The harbor town was in motion with the anticipation of the outgoing tide. Shouts from people used to the demands of their trade echoed in the streets up from the docks. In the morning gloom, Shola trudged her way to the busy bodies of sailors, laborers, and stevedores racing against the unforgiving tide. Shola trained as a blacksmith for years in both the Empire and Caesea, and she considered going to the docks to make her living with the hardened strength in her arms. But she couldn't afford to get crossways with the Porters Guild. She might make a few copper pennies, but she and Kincaid didn't need another powerful enemy. She turned away from the water lapping against the wooden pillars and slapping against the ship's hulls. The town was a haphazard placement of makeshift buildings hugging the shoreline. Shola wondered if the town even had a name. The natural harbor was a boon for trade, and people who couldn't afford to live in the island capital in the center of the bay settled in scattered villages along the coastline, hoping to profit from the excess of Caesea. Streets were often empty, just dirty spaces between homes, and frequently too narrow or twisty for a single wagon to travel the length. Smoke rose from the chimneys of bakers and smiths. Daily labor began at the call of the morning bells, but apprentices stoked the fires to the correct temperature long before sunrise. Her fingers itched to find a way into one of these forges and show her skill. Voices lifted to meet the dawn and challenged the clatter from the docks. Not shouts or curses, a song. Shola's heart leapt for a moment as more voices joined the refrain. The hymn was off-key and yet pure in its intent. simple words to greet the rising sun. The hills burned with a reddish morning glow, another triumphant arrival of a new day, the song of morning light. Shola faced the ghosts of her past. The church was a plain structure of wood and stone. The few parishioners couldn't afford a cathedral with lofty spires hungering for the touch of the heavens. This building was modest, a single floor that looked like a barn or warehouse. A lone bell tower climbed above the rooftop, the only distinguishing feature to separate the chapel from the town's other buildings. The bell rang out in observance of another day. Celebration wasn't on Shola's mind. She couldn't bring herself to join the voices, and stood outside as light claimed the morning skies. Other bells tolled across the port, marking the start of the day. The echoes of the human voices joined in song faded as the creaky door swung open. Men and women covered in the drab of ordinary workers headed forth into the city. The priest of this flock wore long black robes that hung in the dirt in the street. A plain leather belt wrapped around his stout middle. The only adornment to the simple garb was a thin red line at the edge of each sleeve and the hem at his feet. "Greetings, sister. The morning light shine upon your face." Shola's feet froze in place as ice pumped through her veins. The voice pushed against her memories, forgotten memories. "May the morning glow light your path." The priest raised his eyebrows at the traditional response to the formal morning prayer. He tucked his hands into the cuffs of his robes. "A sister far from home. Returning to the church?" Shola broke her gaze from the man and looked at the squalid building and the slipshod work. Coming home. Had her life come to this? "No, I still need to find what I'm looking for." "The goal of all people is to discover their place in a greater plan." "What happens if we never find it?" The priest fidgeted with his belt. The theological debate was unusual in the town's streets. "But the quest itself is the journey, sister. How could it be otherwise?" "The quest must have an ending. Every journey needs a goal." "Our goal would be eternity." "But at what cost to your soul?" Words tumbled out faster than she could control them. Years ago, she left this behind to find herself, and now she was arguing with the church again. "You must seek—" The words trailed off as the priest took another step closer. "Shola? By all that is good and holy, it is you. The wayward daughter is found. Paris, of all places. I passed my test and earned the red ring. I tend to the souls here. Of all places. Your father will be overjoyed. Barris, you can't report this. We've searched across the Empire. Keep looking. You will want to know. He cannot. I will not be here long enough for a message to get to him. Do you wish to let my father know you lost me?" "I don't understand." "You cannot. Things are complicated." "Then explain." Shola's eyes moved from the church back to the preacher. He was genuine, and the concern dated back to a time when they were children. She shrugged out of his grasp. "I cannot. I am sorry." She spun on her heel away from the dumbfounded priest and strode down the street. She dared not look back. Her feet followed the sounds of the pounding hammers. The ring of the steel slowed her heart and settled her soul. A different home. As she walked in, one worker grounded her hammer and wiped the grime of her hands on the leather apron. The apprentice working the bellows behind her took a thankful pause from the unrelenting work. "What do you need?" The brown eyes sized up Shola with the practiced look of a hardened businesswoman. She rested her hand on the counter dividing the forge from the rest of the shop. Muscles rippled, and sweat covered her bare forearms. No stranger to the anvil. "I need work." "Swing hammers before?" "Yes." "I can't pay you until I see your skill. No pay for a week, and no guarantees for pay afterward." Shola's shoulders slumped forward. She couldn't let this offer defeat her. It was better than any she'd gotten since their escape. "Take it or leave it." The woman turned to her forge, and the apprentice pumped the bellow to bring the flames back to life. Shola picked up a leather apron pocked with burns and stained with sweat. She strode into the heat of the forge and tested the weight of the hammers.
I need 3 pounds of nails, 2-inch length.
Shola didn't say another word to the apprentice-level work. She hammered out her frustration on the yielding iron. How would she explain the day to Kincaid? 3. Kincaid. Visitors. His soul labored with the scars of his magic. A deep, dreamless sleep didn't drive away the fatigue. Not this fatigue. His body groaned from a night on the drafty room's frigid floor, and the pain was deeper than his muscles and his bones. This is what it feels like to be old. The thought of aging before his time from his power racked his mind with awful memories. The image of Vedette Atros, the youngest child of the powerful house of Atros, clinging to life in her ancient body, lying in the street, seared into his mind's eye. He turned away from those terrible images. They wouldn't be his future. Shola's bed was tidy, neat, and empty. Although his sleep was restless, he couldn't recall her dressing to leave before dawn. Kincaid shook his head and hoped she wasn't laboring at another day job. They needed time to plan to spend his small winnings and get out of here. But first, breakfast. The stomach reminded him they survived on 1 meal a day to stretch their last coins. He kicked his blankets to the corner of the room and tightened his belt. Drafts from the approaching winter raced through the common area and caused the fire to flicker and sputter. The floor creaked with his footsteps. Too few nails in lumber any carpenter would reject. At least the area was empty after the laborers responded to the morning bells. He ran a copper penny between his fingers as he gestured to the working staff. As he took his perch in the corner on an uneven stool that rocked with his weight, a blast of approaching winter air surged from the main door. 2 men stepped through the opening and slammed the door shut behind them. Their eyes probed the inn's main floor and glared into each shadow. Each wore thick padded armor painted with a checkerboard of red and white squares. Belted swords and daggers hung at each hip, and both carried a long spear. Rather than rest their spears and settle into seats, one turned to open the door again. The common room staff didn't appear scared, only curious. Quite a show. In a moment, a man and a woman strode in from the street. Neither bore the hardened looks of warriors, nor carried an array of weapons. They were more dangerous. These two had the haughty air of nobility. Disgust for the inn was visible across the room. Kincaid considered his options for escape. He had none. Any movement to the stairs back to his room would draw the attention of the alert guards, and slipping out the door was impossible, as he'd have to approach the noble guests. He kept his head down and traced the grain of the wood on the table. The nobles stepped to the bar to summon the owner, and Kincaid couldn't decipher the words out of the voice's low rumble. Guards moved deeper into the room and took notice of the single patron waiting for breakfast. The door opened a last time, and 2 more guards entered. Both wore the same coat of arms. 6 to 1. They couldn't be looking for him. He wasn't worth that much attention. Unless they were from Atros. But the guards from Atros wore red with golden lions. Kincaid fought to control his heart rate under the scrutiny. The intensity of the stares didn't change. They viewed him as a threat. The exchanged words were low but insistent as the man and woman probed for information. None of the people at the bar turned toward Kincaid, but the flow of conversation demanded answers. Kincaid summoned a trickle of arcane energy, fighting back the rush that hungered to claim his soul. With the smallest stream of power, the young wizard pushed his senses out to the edges of the room. The stiff-padded armor crunched from the weapon's weight on the belts, and the thick boots squeaked against the loose floorboards. The guards' breathing were normal as they conducted their duties. They didn't view Kincaid as a threat. He forced his hearing to the conversation with the barkeep, and the words stopped in mid-sentence. The man and woman spun toward Kincaid. Each summoned a channel of their strength and shoved the force of magic back toward him. Kincaid's heart raced as he faced the wizards. Their power was deep and honed to precise levels. His flow of magic was crude compared to their touch of the arcane, and they could toss aside his childish efforts with their magic. Kincaid's expanded senses collapsed around him. The woman and a man approached Kincaid. The halo of power surrounded their bodies as they waved off the guards. Pausing 2 steps away, they sized up Kincaid. He straightened his back, raised an eyebrow, and endured their gaze. Their clothes were less garish than the red and white checkered armor of the escorts, but their clothes were also unique. Each wore long robes from their necks to an inch above the floorboards. The fine silk material fell perfectly across their bodies and flowed as they walked. Even the ruling houses of Caesea had a limited supply of this imported material. Their garment's right sleeve was sky blue, and each had gold thread less than an inch wide at their wrists, and the opposite sleeve carried the red and white checkered pattern of the guards. The middle of the clothing was forest green, with a competing inch of gold at the bottom. Both wore crafted leather belts with only an eating knife in a pouch. They approached the table and stopped by the remaining chairs. "A moment of your time, wizard?" The man's voice gave away his teenage years with a squeak at the end of the sentence. His body was older, the price of magic. Brown eyes probed into Kincaid's soul. Kincaid gestured to the two chairs in front of him with an open palm. The young magi remained seated as they joined him at the uneven table. "Why use magic against us?" The woman was to the point, and more guarded than her companion. "You should have known we would feel the push of power." "We'd have to respond," the man said. "I didn't know you used magic." The pair glanced at each other, and the stone mask of interrogation slipped from their faces. The chairs creaked and groaned as they shifted their weight. Kincaid was relieved the guards, with their weapons and armor, didn't join them, as they would crush the chairs. "You couldn't tell by our rank?" The question was bait, but Kincaid didn't have a choice. "I've never seen those uniforms before, and I don't understand what you mean by rank. But your conversation at the bar worried me." "Don't the laws of the city punish magic with execution?" The woman's voice was low but directive. "Yes, and they've tried. But the city is busier with other things than a poor immigrant." "I see your point." The man nodded in an annoying, all-knowing fashion so typical of nobility. "We do not come from the city or represent any of the misguided noble houses. But I should ask first, are you sorcerati?" the woman asked. Kincaid snorted. "Absolutely not. Do I even look like a native Caesian?" "There have been indiscretions in the past. Not of the sorcerati, of course." The man's voice shifted into a lecturing tone. For a moment, Kincaid missed the words of Magi Cormac. Kincaid couldn't figure out why people always needed to explain things to him. "I am Petra, first rank of the Thurgia, Hekere. And I am Teresa, second rank of the Thurgia, and the leader of his official expedition from Palatium." Upon closer inspection, Kincaid noticed an extra thin braid of gold at the wrists of her robes. Kincaid sat quietly and waited for them to continue. None of the words made sense to him other than their names. Palatium was the Empire of 1,000 Spears' capital city, but the rest didn't register to his former life as a journeyman carpenter. If they were trying to impress Kincaid with their titles, he would disappoint them. He waited them out. "Perhaps you are unfamiliar with the use of magic in the Empire of 1,000 Spears?" the woman, Teresa, said. "I am." "Ah, then we should start even farther back. The beginning would be fine." Kincaid was short with his words, but the school lecture was too loud. If the barkeep or workers heard this conversation about magic, the town guard would hang them by morning, or worse, they'd send them back to Caesea for punishment at the hands of Atros. "There are 2 schools for magic within Palatium. We were students at Thurgia and passed our tests there. We stayed on with the school as full Hekere, the wizards of the capital. Other schools exist throughout the empire as gifted people find their place with their power. Still, none compare to the schools of the capital." Teresa finished her lecture and waited for questions. "I'm sure. Sounds like the sorcerati." "You should understand we are here looking for wizards within Caesea." The young woman leaned forward in her seat and locked her gaze with Kincaid. "Not just any wizards. Ones already proven with their abilities." The man held a smirk on his face as if they were offering knighthood to the uninitiated, maybe even the unworthy. "You must be powerful." Kincaid fumbled with their word and then skipped ahead. "Mages?" "No, we are only of the 1st and 2nd rank. The leaders of the Thurgists are 5th rank. Their control of arcane power is far..."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?